second species for the first time. As you can see, where second species moved all in whole notes in both voices, in the counterpoint and in the cantus firmus and in the counterpoint. Now, the cantus firmus is still in whole notes and will always be in whole notes for our purposes. But now, the counterpoint is moving in half notes, so that there are 2 notes in the counterpoint for each note in the cantus. If this is a little hard to read, I recommend that you turn in your textbook to page 49. This comes from example 226. This is B and C, and in the lower exercise, I've just changed 2 of the notes in the beginning to demonstrate something slightly different. So again, quick overview here. You'll notice half notes pretty much all the way through, certainly in the middle, nothing but half notes. Now observe the beginning and the end. First of all, the beginning. In first species, you had no choices whatsoever about rhythm. In second species, you're going to have 2 choices, and the first of those choices occurs at the very beginning. You have the option either to start right on the downbeat, so the 2 voices start simultaneously, or you can start after a half note rest. And in general, for musical reasons, there's something of a preference. It's legal to start with both notes on the downbeat, but there's something of a preference to start with that rest. And if you look at most of the examples in the text, most of them start with that rest, that it kind of announces second species from the beginning. So, here we go. That's the upper voice. So one voice, and then the other one comes in. There's this great clarity about that, whereas when we first hear the lower exercise, it might be first species until we hear it start to move. It's just kind of a nice effect to emphasize the species by starting on the rest, but not obligatory. Notice that though it's mostly in half notes throughout, both of these last measures in the counterpoint are whole notes. So we always end with 2 whole notes together. That's exactly the same as first species. And where we've got the second choice to make is in our next to last measure. We can either continue the half notes until that final measure, so 2 half notes in the next to last measure, or we can have whole notes in both of those 2 final measures, so that the 2 final measures look like first species. Either one of those is acceptable. Quick things to note: you won't see any ties, you won't see any repeated notes, and that's not something that's ever used in second species. Let me play through the top one of these in its entirety, and then we'll talk about a couple of other basic things about the species. First of all, note that as before, we have a climax. The climax is right here, a high note that's not repeated. In second species, the climax must be on a downbeat, and this observes that, climax on the downbeat. Another thing we like to see is something called a subsidiary climax, or 1 or 2. That is not an absolute highest note, but for a while in the counterpoint, a note that's higher than others. The point of that is really to get a defined shape. It's not something to get too picky about, or take too literally. So here at the beginning, we might say it actually starts on a subsidiary climax. If we don't like the idea of a climax at the very beginning, which we don't for the real climax, we might say that ba 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 ba, that's C, ba 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 ba, is a subsidiary climax for that first stretch until we change register up there and drive into the main climax of the exercise. Now let's take a look at the second exercise and talk a little bit about the climax before I play that one this time. You'll recall that in lower counterpoint, you have your option of either writing a high climax or a low climax. let's take a look, or there can even be both. Let's take a look at these and see which it is in this case. Here it's quick to spot a note that's higher than any other that's on a downbeat. So this is certainly a candidate for an upper, or this is an upper climax. And we can say it has a legal upper climax. So whether it does or doesn't have a lower climax as well, it's a legal second species counterpoint. Let's just see, is there a lower climax? Quick to see that that's the lowest note in this lower line, but it's on a weak beat. So that's not a climax, that's not a candidate to be a climax. If we then say, well, what about notes on the downbeat? We see C's that occur twice on downbeats and once another time, once in the C sharp. So there's really no lower climax in this exercise. It only has an upper climax, and that's fine. Let's listen to this. Because of it, but I hope you noticed the wrong note. I played a B natural instead of a B flat. I'll just redo that part of it quick. As with first species, the climax should not be simultaneous with the climax in the cantus. So here we have an early climax, no problem there. Here, this is the climax of the cantus, this is the climax of the counterpoint. So all that is fine. So these are the very basics of second species. And the following videos will explain more about the details of how it's written.